Picture this. It's a Thursday evening. You've just finished a 10-hour day. You're sitting at your kitchen table, laptop open, takeout container in front of you, and you're doing something you've been putting off for 3 weeks. You're looking at your finances. And what you find there doesn't add up. Not in the catastrophic "I can't pay rent" way. More like the quiet, unsettling way. You earned decent money this year, maybe more than you ever have, and yet, somehow, when you look at the number in your savings account, it doesn't reflect that. It never really does. Where does it go?
That's the question you've probably asked yourself more times than you'd care to admit. Not out loud, not to anyone who'd write it down somewhere, just that private 2 a.m. arithmetic that never comes out even. You work, you earn, you pay the bills, buy the things you need, and some of the things you don't, and then it's just gone. And next month, the whole cycle repeats. Now here's what I want you to notice about that moment, that quiet frustration at the kitchen table. Notice what you do with it. Most people close the laptop. They tell themselves they'll deal with it later. They reassure themselves that they're not that bad off, that other people have it worse, that once this project is done, once this season is over, once life slows down, they'll get organized. They'll figure it out. They always tell themselves they'll figure it out. But here's the uncomfortable truth. Later almost never comes. Not because you're lazy or irresponsible, not because you don't care, but because no one ever actually taught you how money works. You were taught how to earn it, work hard, get the degree, show up on time, produce results. But the instruction manual for what to do with it once you have it, that part somehow got left out. And so you do what most people do. You wing it. You figure out bits and pieces along the way. You pick up habits, some good, most mediocre, and you cobble together something that technically functions but never quite thrives. I want to tell you about a city. It existed more than 4,000 years ago in what is now the desert of modern-day Iraq. In its time, it was the wealthiest city in the known world. Its walls were so wide that a 4-horse chariot could race along the top of them. Its gardens were so extraordinary, they were counted among the 7 wonders of the ancient world. And its people, a remarkable number of them, understood something about money that we've been collectively forgetting and rediscovering ever since. That city was Babylon. And the reason you should care about it is this. The financial principles those ancient Babylonians followed are not only still valid, they may be more relevant today than they have ever been. In 1926, almost exactly 100 years ago, a man named George S. Clason sat down and wrote a small series of pamphlets. He was a businessman, a publisher, a practical man who'd spent his career watching people struggle with money in ways that seemed avoidable. And he had an idea. What if the oldest wisdom about wealth, wisdom that had survived millennia, could be packaged in stories simple enough for anyone to understand? What if instead of charts and spreadsheets and intimidating financial jargon, the secrets of building real wealth could be told through the lives of ordinary people in a city that had mastered prosperity thousands of years before any of us were born? Those pamphlets became The Richest Man in Babylon. They were distributed by banks and insurance companies across America. They became one of the most widely read pieces of financial writing in history, and they've stayed in print without interruption for nearly a century. Why? Because the truth doesn't age. Today, we're going to walk through this entire book together. Every parable, every principle, every lesson. You're going to meet Arkad, a man who started life as a poor scribe with nothing and became the wealthiest person in the most prosperous city on earth. You're going to meet Bansir and Kobbi, Two men who worked hard their entire lives and had almost nothing to show for it. You're going to meet Dabasir, a man who fell into slavery because of his debts and fought his way back to freedom through something as simple and as difficult as a written plan. And by the time we're done, you're going to have something most people never get: a clear, coherent, timeless framework for how money actually works. Not tricks, not hacks, not a get-rich-quick shortcut. Something older and more reliable than all of that. Something that worked 4,000 years ago and will still work 4,000 years from now. Let's go to Babylon. Before we dive in, let me set the stage for what you're about to experience. This is not a typical book summary. We're not going to race through a list of bullet points and call it a day. We're going to go deep. Because the genius of the richest man in Babylon is not in its principles. Those are actually quite simple. The genius is in the stories, in the specificity, in the human beings who embody these ideas and show us what they look like when they're actually lived. Clason writes in a slightly archaic style. His characters speak in a kind of old-world English, thy and thee and verily and all of that. It sounds formal on the page, but when you let it sink in, it has a dignity to it, a weight, like advice that has been tested and refined across generations. Here's what this book is fundamentally about: the gap between the person who earns money and the person who keeps it, the person who works hard and the person who builds wealth. Those are not the same person, not automatically. And Clason's mission across every parable in this book is to show you what separates them. It's not intelligence, it's not luck, it's not connections or timing or being born into the right family. It's a small number of disciplines practiced consistently over time. That's it. That's the whole thesis. Deceptively simple, brutally demanding, completely achievable. We'll cover 10 parables today, the core heart of this book. By the end, you'll understand not just what to do with money, but why. And you'll hear it from people who lived it. Even if those people are fictional, their experiences are so grounded in human psychology that they feel completely real. All right, Chapter 1, The Man Who Desired Gold. The book opens with a scene so recognizable it almost hurts. Two men are sitting outside the city walls of Babylon at the end of a long day. One is Bansir, a chariot builder, a craftsman, a man who is genuinely good at what he does. The other is Kobbi, a musician, someone who has spent his life mastering his instrument and performing at festivals and gatherings across the city. Both men are middle-aged, both have worked hard their entire lives, and both men are completely, utterly broke. Bansir is sitting on the low wall outside his house, staring into the distance. He doesn't even have the energy to work. His wife needs money. His purse is empty. And for the first time, or maybe the 100th time, he is asking himself the question that so many of us have asked in quiet moments. Why? Why, after all this work, is this still my life? Kobbi shows up and asks to borrow money. And when Bansir tells him his purse is empty, Kobbi is surprised. He thought Bansir had been doing well with his chariot work. Bansir says, "I have been. I've earned a great deal. And yet here we are." That exchange is Clason's first lesson, delivered not as a lecture, but as a moment of recognition. Two skilled, hard-working, respected men, and nothing to show for it. Not because the city failed them, not because they lacked talent, but because they never learned what to do with the money they earned. And so Bansir makes a decision. He looks at Kobbi and says, "Let's go find Arkad." Arkad was their childhood friend. They grew up together in the same neighborhood, played the same games, had the same opportunities. But somewhere along the way, something diverged. Arkad had become the richest man in Babylon, unimaginably wealthy, known across the entire city for his fortune. And Bansir realizes, standing there with his empty purse, that he has never once stopped to ask Arkad how he did it. That moment right there is worth pausing on. Because how many of us have done exactly this? How many of us have watched someone from our same starting point build a completely different financial life and never actually asked what they did differently? We assume they got lucky. We assume some invisible advantage explains it. We tell ourselves the story that makes us feel better and move on. Bansir and Kobbi don't do that. They go find Arkad. What Clason is establishing in this opening chapter is a premise that runs through the entire book. Financial success is not random. It is not the exclusive domain of a special class of people. It follows rules, and those rules can be learned. Bansir and Kobbi represent, with extraordinary precision, the experience of the majority of working people throughout history. Not lazy, not careless, not irresponsible, just uninformed. They were never taught the rules of money, and so they played the game without knowing the rules, and wondered why they kept losing. There's a particular kind of frustration in that, isn't there? The frustration of effort without result, of doing everything you were told to do, work hard, be skilled, show up, and still arriving at middle age feeling financially stuck, like you're running on a treadmill, burning real calories, covering zero actual distance. But here's what I want you to carry from this chapter into everything that follows. Bansir and Kobbi did something most people in their position never do. They got curious instead of resigned. They asked the question instead of closing the laptop. They walked to Arkad's house and knocked on the door. That act, the decision to seek knowledge rather than accept circumstances, is itself the first step on the path to wealth. Not a savings account, not an investment. The willingness to say, I don't know enough yet, and I'm going to find someone who does. In the next chapter, Arkad opens the door, and what he shares with his old friends is going to reshape everything. Arkad greets his two old friends warmly. He's not distant or superior about his wealth. He's direct and generous. The way someone is when they've genuinely figured something out and are eager to share it. Bansir says to him, "We grew up together. Same streets, same teachers, same opportunities. And yet here you are, the richest man in all of Babylon. And here we are. Tell us, how?" Arkad smiles, and then he tells them his story. He was, as a young man, a scribe in Babylon's Hall of Records, a low-paying job. He worked hard, but his wages barely covered his necessities. And he noticed something that gnawed at him. He was spending his entire life turning his labor into gold, and then immediately turning that gold back into nothing. Every coin earned was a coin spent. Months passed, years passed, nothing accumulated. One day, Arkad was tasked with carving into clay tablets the will of a rich moneylender named Algamish. He worked on it for 2 days. When he finished, Algamish was pleased, but told him the work wasn't quite complete. He asked Arkad to stay through the night to finish it. Arkad, frustrated by the extra unpaid work, decided to negotiate. He asked Algamish to share with him the secret of acquiring wealth. Algamish laughed. Then he looked at this young scribe, this serious, hungry young man, And he said yes. What Algamish told Arkad that night is the foundation of this entire book. It is one of the simplest ideas in all of personal finance, and it is one of the most consistently ignored. He said, "A part of all you earn is yours to keep." Arkad didn't understand at first. He said, "But isn't everything I earn already mine? I earn it and I spend it. On food, on rent, on clothing." And Algamish said, "That is exactly the problem. When you pay your landlord, you are making him richer. When you pay the baker, you are making him richer. When you pay the cloth merchant, you are making him richer. But at the end of all that paying, you have made yourself nothing. A part of what you earn should go to you first, before the landlord, before the baker, before anyone else. Pay yourself first." That phrase has become so commonplace in personal finance circles that it almost loses its power. But in 1926, when Clason wrote it into the mouth of a Babylonian moneylender 4,000 years in the past, it was a revelation. It still is if you actually think about what it means. We are conditioned by our culture, by our habits, by the entire structure of modern commerce to pay everyone else first. The mortgage company, the credit card, the utility bills, the streaming subscriptions, the coffee shop, the grocery store. And then, if there's anything left at the end of the month, we might put something aside. Maybe. If there is anything left, which there usually isn't. Algamish is saying, reverse that. Before a single coin goes to anyone else, take 10% and put it aside for yourself. Not to spend, to keep, to accumulate, to eventually put to work. Arkad did it. He started saving 10% of everything he earned. And then, crucially, Algamish came back a year later and asked what he'd done with his savings. Arkad told him proudly that he'd given it to a brickmaker named Osmor to invest in some rare jewels from across the sea. Algamish was not pleased. He said, "You gave your hard-saved gold to a brickmaker to invest in jewels? A brickmaker knows bricks. He knows nothing about jewels." The investment failed, didn't it? It had. Osmor had been deceived by a Phoenician jewel trader, and the money was gone. And here, Algamish gives Arkad the second lesson layered inside the first. Not only must you save, but you must be wise about where that savings goes. Seek the counsel of people who actually know what they're doing in the domain you're investing in. Don't give your gold to a brickmaker to buy jewels. Don't take tips from your cousin about penny stocks. The person you take financial advice from should be someone who handles money for a living and does it well. Arkad listened. He learned. He saved. He invested carefully. And year by year, slowly at first, then with accelerating force, his wealth grew. He didn't do anything spectacular. He didn't invent something brilliant or stumble onto a gold mine. He applied a small number of principles consistently over time, and the mathematics of compounding did the rest. By the time his old friends Bansir and Kobbi knocked on his door, he was the richest man in the city. And the wild, humbling thing, he tells them, if you had done what I did, if either of you had simply saved 10% of everything you ever earned and put it to careful use, you would be wealthy today too. You had the same opportunities. You had the same capacity. You just didn't know the rule. Now you do. Word got around. That's what happens when one man in a city of hundreds of thousands becomes extraordinarily wealthy. People want to know how. And so the king of Babylon, a man named Sargon, summoned Arkad to the palace. Sargon was worried. He'd noticed that wealth in Babylon was concentrating. A small number of men held most of it while the majority of citizens struggled. And he wanted to fix it, not by taking from the wealthy, but by teaching the others. He asked Arkad, "Can what you know be taught?" Arkad said yes, and so the king commissioned him to teach 100 men, scribes, merchants, craftsmen, soldiers, the principles of building wealth. Those lessons became the 7 cures for a lean purse. Let's go through all 7.
The first cure is the one we already know. Save 10% of everything you earn. But Arkad teaches it with an image that I find genuinely beautiful. He asks his students to imagine a wallet. Every morning they fill it with 10 coins for their daily needs. Every night it is empty. Now imagine, what if every morning, before you spent a single coin, you took 1 coin out and set it aside permanently? You'd still have 9 coins to live on. And at the end of 10 days, you'd have a 10th wallet building beside the first. The key insight here is that people consistently overestimate how much they need and underestimate how well they can live on less. You think you need all 10 coins, but Arkad is betting you that if you only had 9, you'd find a way. You'd adapt, you'd prioritize, and you'd still be fine. That 1 coin, that 10%, is not a sacrifice. It's a payment to your future self. Cure 2. Control thy expenditures. Here's where Arkad gets a little sharp. One of his students raises a hand and says, "But my expenses already exceed my income. I can't save 10%. I can barely cover what I need." Arkad says, with more than a little directness, that what you call necessities are not all actually necessary. He asks the class to look hard at their spending, to separate what they genuinely need from what they've simply gotten used to. And this is the part that stings, because he's right. Our wants are elastic. They expand to fill whatever income we have. Someone earning $30,000 a year thinks they need everything they spend it on. Then they get a raise to $50,000, and within a year, they once again feel like they can barely make ends meet. The expenses just grew. Arkad's cure is to confuse your desires with your needs as little as possible. To draw a line deliberately, consciously, between what you must have and what you have simply decided you deserve. That line is where real financial progress begins. Cure 3. Make thy gold multiply. Saving is only the first step. A purse of gold sitting in a chest is not building wealth, it's just sitting there. The third cure is putting your accumulated savings to work, investing it, letting it earn a return which itself earns a return which earns more still. This is the ancient principle of compounding, what Einstein reportedly called the 8th wonder of the world. Arkad tells his students, every coin you save should be sent out to work as your servant. It should come back to you bearing children coins, and those children coins should also go to work and bring back grandchildren coins. A gold piece put to wise use multiplies in ways that labor alone never can. The math, when you actually sit with it, is staggering. A single coin invested wisely, compounding over decades, can become 10, 20, 100 coins without you doing another day's work. This is the mechanism behind every great fortune in history. Not effort alone. Effort plus compounding. Cure 4. Guard thy treasures from loss. The fourth cure might be the most practical in modern terms, because we live in a world saturated with people who want your money. Arkad says the first principle of investment is to secure the return of your principal. In other words, before you think about what you might gain, make sure you understand what you might lose.
He tells his students about the danger of fascinating investment opportunities, the ones that promise unusually high returns, the ones where someone breathless is assuring you that you can't miss. He says if you don't understand how the money is being made, don't invest. If the returns being promised seem too extraordinary, they usually are. Guard your treasure from loss the way you'd guard your home from fire, with vigilance, not wishful thinking. In 2008, a man named Bernie Madoff promised consistent, impossibly stable returns to thousands of investors, including experienced financial professionals who should have known better. They lost billions. In the 1630s, tulip bulbs in Holland sold for the price of houses before the market collapsed overnight. The warning is always the same across every era. If it sounds too good to be true, it usually is. Arkad knew this 4,000 years ago. Cure 5. Make of thy dwelling a profitable investment. This one is specific and practical. Own the place where you live if you can. Arkad tells his students that a man who owns his home has a form of security that a man paying rent can never have. His landlord cannot double the rent. He cannot be evicted. His family has a stable foundation, and the value of the property over time tends to grow. For ancient Babylon, this meant building or buying a house. For us, it means thinking seriously about home ownership as a component of long-term wealth. Not the only component, not a guarantee, but a pillar. Cure 6. Ensure a future income. This is Clason's ancient version of insurance and retirement planning. Arkad asks his students, what happens to your family if you become ill and cannot work? What happens when you are old and your body can no longer do what it once could? He says, a wise man provides for the future while he has the present to do so. Arrange for income that will continue beyond your working years. Protect against the catastrophes that cannot always be predicted. In modern terms, life insurance, disability insurance, retirement accounts. The specific vehicles have changed, the principle has not. The time to prepare for hard times is during good ones. Cure 7. Increase thy ability to earn. The 7th cure is perhaps the most expansive. Arkad tells his students that the desire to do more, earn more, be more, that desire, properly channeled, is an engine of wealth. As your skills grow, as your knowledge deepens, as your reputation strengthens, your earning capacity rises. And more income, when handled wisely, means more saving, more investing, more security. He's not talking about working longer hours. He's talking about becoming more valuable, learning the things your field rewards, developing the judgment that commands respect and compensation, investing in yourself with the same seriousness with which you invest your gold. 7 cures. Simple on the surface, demanding in practice. But here's what I find most remarkable about them. Together, they don't just describe how to build wealth. They describe a way of living, a set of habits deeply held that transform a person's relationship with money from reactive and chaotic to intentional and purposeful. That transformation from reactive to intentional is the real cure for a lean purse. Here's a question that has probably crossed your mind at least once. Is it really all about discipline and savings? What about luck? What about the people who seem to catch a break at exactly the right moment, who stumble onto an opportunity or inherit something, or just happen to be in the right room? Clason has an answer, and it's not what you might expect. The citizens of Babylon are gathered at the Temple of Learning, a kind of open forum for ideas and discussion. The topic of the evening is luck. Specifically, does luck favor certain people? Is good fortune something that happens to you or something you can court? The debate is lively. Some men argue that luck is purely random, a capricious goddess who smiles on whoever she pleases, and there's nothing to be done about it. Others disagree. And the conclusion the group reaches together is fascinating. They decide that luck is not random at all, but that it does not favor the passive. It favors the prepared. It favors the person who is ready to act when opportunity appears. Let me give you the story they tell to illustrate it. A farmer's son, over many years, had saved a modest sum of gold. One day he heard that a merchant from Nineveh was in town, selling fine livestock at unusually low prices because he needed to convert everything to coin before departing. The son recognized immediately that if he bought the animals and drove them to a market in a distant city, he could sell them for twice what he paid. He acted quickly. He went to the merchant, negotiated the deal, made the purchase that night before anyone else had the same idea. He drove the livestock to the distant market and made a handsome profit. Was that luck? His neighbors thought so. They called him the lucky farmer's son. But the men at the Temple of Learning say no. Luck had almost nothing to do with it. Luck presented itself as an opportunity, a merchant passing through town. Luck did that much, but the son's preparation did the rest. He had savings that allowed him to act. He had enough knowledge of markets to recognize the opportunity. He had the decisiveness to move immediately rather than deliberate until the chance was gone. Any man in the city could have noticed that merchant. Very few could have done what that farmer's son did. The men at the temple reached this conclusion. The goddess of good luck favors those who take action when opportunity appears. And opportunity most often appears for those who are already in motion, saving, learning, building, preparing. There's a deeper point here that I think is worth sitting with. Most people wait for the big break. They're in a holding pattern, living their lives, doing their work, not really building anything, waiting for the moment when fortune arrives. And because they are not moving, they do not recognize fortune when it comes. They are not positioned to take advantage of it. The opportunity passes, and they tell themselves they just weren't lucky. But consider the person who is already saving, already investing small amounts, already building relationships in their industry, already learning and growing. When an opportunity shows up in front of that person, an unexpected job offer, a market dip, a chance to buy something undervalued, they can act because they are ready, because they have the resources, because they have the knowledge. That's not luck. That's preparation meeting opportunity. Clason adds one more nuance. Procrastination is the enemy of luck. The farmer's son moved that night. He didn't say, "I'll think about it." He didn't ask 20 friends for their opinions. He recognized the opportunity, waited quickly, and acted. How many opportunities have you let pass because you waited too long? Because you needed to feel completely certain before you moved? Because you talked yourself out of action with the comfortable story that it probably wasn't the right time? The goddess of good luck does not wait. She moves on to the next person who is ready. Are you ready? This is one of the most powerful chapters in the book. If the 7 cures tell you how to acquire wealth, the 5 laws of gold tell you how to keep it, grow it, and protect it from the very human tendencies that destroy it. The chapter is built around the story of Arkad's son, Nomasir. When Arkad felt it was time for his son to go out and build his own life, he gave him 2 things, a bag of gold and a clay tablet inscribed with the 5 laws. He told Nomasir, "Go into the world, make your own fortune, return in 10 years and show me what you have done with these 2 gifts. If you have used the gold wisely, I will know my estate is in good hands. If you have lost it, the clay tablet alone will make you wealthy again, if you truly understand it." Law 1. Gold comes gladly and in increasing quantity to any man who will put by not less than 1/10 of his earnings to create an estate for his future and that of his family. We know this one. Save at minimum 10%, non-negotiable, the starting line. Law 2. Gold labors diligently and contentedly for the wise owner, who finds for it profitable employment, multiplying even as the flocks of the field. Put your savings to work. An investment that compounds is not passive, it is actively building your future even while you sleep. Law 3. Gold clings to the protection of the cautious owner who invests it under the advice of men wise in its handling. This is the counsel that Arkad himself received from Algamish. Invest with guidance from those who actually know. A brickmaker doesn't know jewels. A salesman doesn't know commodities. Seek expertise in the domain you're entering, not enthusiasm. Law 4. Gold slips away from the man who invests it in businesses or purposes with which he is not familiar or which are not approved by those skilled in its keep. Nomasir learned this one the hard way. He arrived in a new city, met exciting people, got swept up in the energy of a horse trading scheme he knew nothing about. He lost 1/3 of his gold almost immediately. The law is harsh and clear. If you don't understand it, don't invest in it. Period. No exceptions for excitement. No exceptions for charismatic salespeople. No exceptions for opportunities that feel once in a lifetime. Here's what happened to Nomasir. He lost most of his gold through inexperience and impulsive decisions. He was down to almost nothing. And then, in his darkest moment, he remembered the clay tablet his father had given him. He took it out and actually read it, really read it, for the first time. He started over, from almost nothing, but this time he applied the laws. He saved, he invested carefully, he sought out wise counsel. He resisted the tempting schemes. And over the following years, he rebuilt. Not just to what he'd started with, he exceeded it. He returned to his father at the end of 10 years wealthier than when he'd left, despite having squandered his original gift. His gold was gone. His laws were not, and the laws were worth infinitely more. The lesson Clason's teaching through Nomasir's story is one of the most important in this book. Principles are more valuable than money, because money can be lost. Principles, once truly internalized, cannot. They will rebuild the money and build it stronger. If you woke up tomorrow with nothing in your bank account but these 5 laws genuinely in your bones, applied, not just understood, you would eventually be wealthy again. It might take years, but you would get there, because you would know how. The next parable shifts the angle slightly. We've been learning how to build wealth. Now Clason asks us to think about something harder. What do you do when someone you love needs money? Meet Rodan. He's a spear maker, a craftsman employed by the King's Guard, good at his job, well-regarded, modestly prosperous, and one day the king gives him 50 pieces of gold as a reward for crafting a particularly excellent spear. 50 pieces of gold, more money than Rodan has ever held in his hands at once. Within days, his brother-in-law shows up. The brother-in-law wants the money, not as a gift, as a loan. He has a merchant venture he's certain will make them both wealthy. He's passionate about it, he's persuasive, and he's family. How do you say no to family? Rodan is torn. He goes to Mathon, the gold lender of Babylon, a man of vast experience with exactly these situations, and asks for advice.
Mathon doesn't answer immediately. He tells Rodan a series of stories first. He tells him about the people who owe him money, the farmer who borrowed against a good harvest that never came, the merchant who borrowed for a venture that failed, the young man who borrowed for luxuries he couldn't afford. He walks Rodan through the graveyard of good intentions and bad loans. And then he asks Rodan a pointed question. Does your brother-in-law have experience in trading? Has he successfully run a merchant venture before? Does he have assets of his own at risk in this deal? Rodan has to admit, no, no, and no. Mathon says, then lending him this money is not generosity. It is poor judgment dressed up as generosity. This is a lesson that sits uncomfortably with many people, because it runs against our instincts. We want to help the people we love, and when they frame a request for money as an investment opportunity, when they're enthusiastic and confident and it's family, saying no feels cold, ungenerous, almost cruel. But Mathon is pointing at something real. A loan made to someone who cannot repay it does not help them. It gives them temporary comfort at the cost of your permanent loss. And if the venture fails, which ventures often do, especially those proposed by inexperienced people with borrowed money, you haven't just lost your gold, you've potentially damaged the relationship. Mathon's principle: lend only to those who have both the ability to repay and collateral that secures the loan. Not because you're heartless, but because lending beyond those parameters is not an act of kindness. It is wishful thinking masquerading as generosity. Now, here's the nuance Clason is careful to include. Mathon is not saying never help your family. He's saying if you want to help someone who cannot meet the terms of a prudent loan, consider giving them a gift you can afford to lose rather than a loan you cannot. Be clear with yourself about what you're doing. A gift is generous. A loan that you secretly know will never be repaid is neither a gift nor a loan. It is confusion wearing both costumes. Know which one you're making, and make it from clarity, not pressure. This is the shortest parable in the book, but it carries a weight that punches well above its length. Babylon was famous for its walls, massive, extraordinary structures, wide enough at the top for chariots to race along, tall enough to make the city essentially impregnable. The Babylonians invested enormously in those walls, not because they were constantly at war, but because they understood something fundamental about the nature of wealth and security. The chapter opens with the city under siege. An enemy army, the Assyrians, has surrounded Babylon for months. The citizens can hear the noise of the enemy outside. Supplies are limited, morale is difficult, and yet, inside the walls, people are calm. Not serene, exactly, but not panicked, because they know what those walls can withstand. Clason's point is elegant. The walls didn't matter when there was no enemy. During peacetime, a person might walk past those massive fortifications every day without thinking much about them. They were just there, a feature of the landscape. But the moment the enemy arrived, those walls became the difference between survival and catastrophe. He applies this directly to personal finance. Insurance, emergency funds,
debt-free living, owning assets rather than renting them. These things don't feel urgent when life is smooth. When you're employed, healthy, and nothing unexpected has happened in a while, it's tempting to defer the building of your walls, to think, "I'll get to that eventually." But the enemy doesn't announce its arrival. Job loss doesn't send a calendar invite. Medical emergencies don't ask if it's a convenient time. Market crashes don't wait until you've finished building your position. The time to build the walls is before the siege. What are your walls? They are, in practical terms, an emergency fund of 3 to 6 months of expenses. Adequate insurance on your income, your health, your life. Ownership of assets rather than dependence on a single income stream. Debt levels that don't put you at existential risk if something unexpected happens. These are not exciting things to build. They don't feel urgent on a good day. But the Babylonians who looked out from behind those walls at the Assyrian army were incredibly, profoundly grateful for every stone that had been laid. Build your walls. Do it now while the sun is out and the work is easy. Don't wait for the siege. Of all the characters in this book, Dabasir may be the one who stays with you the longest. Not because he is the most successful, but because his story is the most honest about failure and what it actually takes to come back from it. When we meet Dabasir, he is not in Babylon. He is in the desert, traveling with a caravan of camels on his way back to the city he fled years earlier as a broken, indebted young man. Let me tell you how he got to that desert. Dabasir was a saddlemaker's son. He apprenticed under his father and showed real promise. He was skilled, he was energetic, and when a girl he loved agreed to marry him, his future seemed bright. But Dabasir had a problem. He could not resist spending more than he earned. Every time he got some coin, he spent it on the fine things his young wife admired, on feasts with friends, on pleasures that seemed harmless one at a time. And when his own coin ran out, he borrowed from merchants, from family, from anyone who would extend credit, always with the sincere intention of paying it back once things improved. Things did not improve. They got catastrophically worse. His creditors came calling. Unable to pay and unwilling to face the shame, Dabasir did what people cornered by debt have done throughout history. He ran. He fell in with a band of thieves, was caught, and was sold into slavery in the Syrian desert. He was 30 years old. He had nothing. He had no one. He was someone else's property. The details of his slavery are not dwelt upon extensively, but what Clason captures is the moment of transformation. Dabasir is sitting in the desert, exhausted and humiliated, when he notices the camels around him. These animals, enormous, powerful, capable, do not complain. They do not resent their loans. They simply keep walking, one step at a time, until they reach their destination. And Dabasir has a thought. Do I have the soul of a free man or the soul of a slave? Not in the physical sense, in the deeper sense. Is there something inside him that can choose to get back up, that can decide in the middle of absolute failure that this is not the end of his story? He decides there is. Sirrah, the wife of his master who had taken pity on him, asks Dabasir a question that cuts right to the heart of the matter. If you want to return to Babylon as a free man, what will you do differently? He tells her, I will repay every debt I owe, every last coin. I will not run this time. I will face it. She helps him escape. He makes his way back across the desert to Babylon, traveling with camel traders, earning his way, sleeping under stars, surviving on determination and almost nothing else. When he arrives in Babylon, he goes directly to his creditors. He doesn't hide, he doesn't make excuses. He goes to each one, tells them the truth, that he has nothing now, but that he intends to repay them fully, and asks for their patience. And then he starts working as a camel trader, using the skills he developed during his time in the desert. He develops a system. He earns. He lives on 70% of what he earns. He gives 20% to his creditors, divided proportionally among all of them, so everyone gets something every month. And he saves 10% for himself. It is not fast, it is not glamorous, but it works. Month by month, creditor by creditor, debt by debt. Dabasir pays it all back, every last coin. What Clason is offering through Dabasir's story is not just a debt repayment strategy. It's something more fundamental, a portrait of what it means to have integrity with money. To face the full weight of what you owe, rather than running from it. To make a plan you can actually execute, and then execute it, even when it is slow, even when it is humbling, even when there is no dramatic breakthrough, just the quiet discipline of one more month, one more payment, one more step. Dabasir started as a slave in the Syrian desert. He ended as one of the most respected camel traders in Babylon, wealthy, free, and at peace with the past because he had faced it fully. He chose to have the soul of a free man. The rest followed. This chapter is unique in the book because it is structured as a kind of documentary. Clason introduces us to an archaeologist, a professor named Alfred Shrewsbury, who is excavating in the ruins of ancient Babylon. In the Rebel, he finds 5 clay tablets translated from Babylonian. They are Dabasir's own records, the actual written accounting of his debt repayment plan, written in his own hand thousands of years ago. Then, Clason does something clever and moving. He shows us a modern couple, the archaeologist's friend and his wife, who are drowning in debt in the 1920s. And he asks, what if they followed Dabasir's exact system, written in those ancient tablets? Would it work? They try it. They write down every debt they owe, every single one, clearly on paper. The act of writing it down is itself transformative. Most people avoid looking at their full debt load because it's painful. Writing it down, naming it, facing the number, that is the first act of courage in the process. Then they create Dabasir's system in modern terms, 70% for living expenses, 20% to creditors, 10% to savings. They contact each creditor, explain their situation honestly, and ask for patience while they repay. What happens? Some creditors are difficult. Some are surprisingly understanding. The process is uncomfortable, but it works. Month by month, the list of debts gets shorter. The balance in their savings grows. Their stress decreases, not because the debt is gone yet, but because they have a plan, because they are moving. There is something profound in this chapter that I don't want you to miss. Clason is saying, through this narrative device, that Dabasir's clay tablets, written 4,000 years before that couple sat down at their kitchen table, contained exactly what they needed. The ancient principles of ancient Babylon, preserved in clay, crossed millennia and still applied with perfect precision to the 1920s. And I would argue, with complete confidence, that they apply with equal precision to right now, to whatever you are sitting with at this moment, to the debt that may be keeping you awake at night, to the feeling that you are behind and that catching up is impossible. Dabasir caught up. The archaeologist's friends caught up. The system works, not because it's clever or sophisticated, because it is simple, honest, and sustainable. It asks you to live on less than you earn, to honor your obligations, and to build something for yourself at the same time. Those three things, done consistently, dissolve debt and build wealth, every time, in every era, in clay tablets and in spreadsheets alike. The final parable in the book is a fitting end, a story that loops back to themes from the very first chapter, but goes somewhere deeper, somewhere more personal. We meet Sharru Nada, a merchant of great wealth and reputation, traveling with his business partner's grandson, a young man named Hadan Gula. Hadan Gula is proud, entitled, and disdainful of work. He is the grandson of a man who built something real, and he has grown up in the comfort of that inheritance without understanding where it came from. During their journey, Sharru Nada tells the young man his story. Sharru Nada was once a slave. He was sold into slavery as a young man through circumstances outside his control, captured in a raid, traded through several hands, eventually set to work in a bakery in Babylon. He could have been bitter. He could have done the minimum required and spent his energy on resentment. Many men in his position did exactly that. But Sharru Nada made a decision. He would work harder than anyone around him, not for his master's sake, for his own, because he understood, with a clarity that is remarkable, that the habits you build in hard circumstances are the habits that define you when circumstances change. He worked with such energy and dedication in the bakery that the baker gave him extra work, and then offered him a share of the profits. He saved every coin. He worked nights. He added to his skills. He built a reputation as a man of extraordinary reliability and effort, and eventually he earned enough to purchase his own freedom. After his freedom, he built a trading business. The same qualities that had made him invaluable as a slave made him extraordinary as a free man. He worked harder than his competitors. He honored every commitment. He saved carefully, invested wisely, and grew steadily. Over decades, he became one of the wealthiest merchants in Babylon. He tells Hadan Gula, "I was the luckiest man in Babylon, not because fortune smiled on me, but because I found, through the necessity of slavery, the one thing that makes any man truly free, the love of honest work well done." Hadan Gula is silent for a long moment, and then he asks, "Do you think my grandfather understood this about work the way you do?" Sharru Nada smiles and says, "Your grandfather was my partner for many years. He understood it deeply. And I think, if you look carefully, you will find that everything he left you came from that understanding." This final chapter feels like Clason's quiet insistence on something that the rest of the book has circled around but not stated quite so plainly. Wealth is not just a set of financial principles, it is a character, a way of being. It is built not only with savings accounts and investment strategies, but with the willingness to give full effort to whatever work is in front of you. Sharru Nada was technically a slave for years of his life, and he tells us with complete sincerity that he was free long before he purchased his freedom, because freedom, in the deepest sense, is not a legal status. It is the inner stance of a person who works with integrity and takes full responsibility for their life. That is the luckiest man in Babylon, not the man who caught the best breaks, the man who, in the middle of the worst circumstances imaginable, chose to be the best version of himself.
We've traveled a long way together. From Bansir and Kobbi sitting on that wall with empty purses, to Arkad's kitchen table, where one principle changed everything. Through the 7 cures and the 5 laws, through Dabasir's desert and Sharru Nada's bakery. Let me pull the threads together. The Richest Man in Babylon is not, at its core, a book about money. It's a book about character, about the specific qualities, discipline, wisdom, courage, integrity that make wealth possible. And it's quietly making the argument that these qualities are not innate traits you either have or don't. They are practices, habits, choices made repeatedly over time until they become second nature.
Look at every character in this book who builds wealth, and you'll see a common thread. Not intelligence. Bansir and Kobbi were intelligent men. Not privilege. Arkad started as a poor scribe. Dabasir started as a debt-ridden failure. Sharru Nada started as a slave. What they had, or developed, was the willingness to do the hard, unsexy, non-negotiable things consistently. Save before you spend. Spend less than you earn. Put your savings to careful work. Guard against loss. Seek wisdom from those who have it. Honor your obligations. Build walls before the siege. Work hard not for appearance, but for the deep satisfaction of work done well. None of those things require luck. None of them require a specific income level or a particular background or a perfect set of circumstances. They require a decision, and then another decision, and then 1,000 more decisions quietly made that most people around you are not making.
I want to say something about why this book has lasted 100 years, because I think it's worth understanding. It's not because the financial advice is unique. Plenty of books tell you to save 10%. Plenty of books warn against bad investments. The reason The Richest Man in Babylon has endured, the reason you can find it on the nightstand of billionaires and give it to a 20-year-old and have it change their life, is because it delivers its wisdom through stories about people. Real human beings, fictional, yes, but psychologically completely real, making the choices we all face, struggling with the same temptations, making the same mistakes, and finding their way through. We don't just understand Arkad's principles intellectually. We feel them through Nomasir's humiliation when his gold disappears in a bad horse trade. We feel them through Dabasir in the desert, asking himself if he has the soul of a free man. We feel them through Bansir on the wall, finally tired enough of being broke to walk to his friend's house and ask. Story is how human beings learn things that last. And Clason understood that 100 years ago. The other reason this book endures is its refusal to oversimplify. It doesn't promise that following these principles will make you a billionaire by next Thursday. It says, follow these principles consistently over time, and you will build real and lasting wealth. That is a promise, a serious, calibrated, honest promise. And for the vast majority of people who have followed it, it has been true.
The path is not exciting. Saving 10% every month for 20 years is not exciting. Paying off your creditors one by one over 3 years is not exciting. Building an emergency fund before you invest in anything is not exciting. Seeking the advice of genuinely wise people before you make a major investment instead of acting on the hot tip you heard at dinner is definitely not exciting. But the life on the other side of those disciplines, the freedom, the security, the options, the peace of mind, that is extraordinarily exciting. That is worth every boring, disciplined month it takes to get there. All right, let's make this concrete. because inspiration without action is just a feeling, and feelings fade. Here are 5 things you can do starting today that translate the principles of this book into real life. Action 1. Calculate your actual savings rate. Not what you think it is, not what you intend it to be. Look at the last 3 months of your income and your spending. Calculate exactly what percentage of your earnings you actually kept. For most people, this number is lower than they expect, sometimes dramatically lower. If it's below 10%, that's your first objective. Get it to 10. Not someday, this month. Set up an automatic transfer so the money moves to a savings account before you can spend it. Remove the decision from the equation. Make saving the default, not the exception.
Action 2. Write down every debt you owe. This is the Dabasir move. Get a piece of paper or a spreadsheet, but honestly, paper feels more real, and write them all down. Every creditor, every balance, every interest rate, the total number, no matter how uncomfortable it is to see. Name the thing you're carrying. It loses some of its power when you can see it clearly. And once you can see it clearly, you can make a plan, a real plan, with specific monthly payments, a timeline, and a finish line.
Action 3. Identify one investment you don't understand and decline it. This is a practice in restraint. Whether it's a cryptocurrency someone pitched you at dinner, a stock tip from a coworker, or an app that promises to grow your money in ways you can't quite explain, identify it and say no. Not forever necessarily, but until you understand it. Until you can explain precisely how the money is made and what the realistic risks are. The 4th and 5th laws of gold are violated more often than any others. Practice honoring them deliberately.
Action 4. Find one person who has done what you want to do. Not a YouTube personality, not a social media account with curated highlights. An actual human being, ideally someone you can speak with, who has built the kind of financial life you are working toward. Ask them questions, real questions. What did you do first? What mistakes did you make? What would you tell your younger self? People who have genuinely built wealth are usually more willing to share than you'd expect. The knowledge they accumulated is valuable, and most of them remember what it felt like to be starting out. Action 5. Work with full effort on whatever is in front of you. This is Sharru Nada's lesson, and it may be the most counterintuitive one in the entire book. You don't have to love your current job. You don't have to be in your dream career. But whatever work is in front of you, do it with full effort. Not for your employer, ultimately, for yourself. Because the habits you build in your current circumstances are the habits you'll carry into the next level. The person who gives minimum effort while waiting for the right opportunity does not become someone who gives full effort when the opportunity arrives. The way you do anything is the way you do everything. Choose to do it well.
I want to say something to you directly, not to the audience, to you specifically. If you've been listening to this and feeling a complicated mix of things, some inspiration, some recognition, maybe some guilt about past decisions, maybe some frustration that you weren't taught any of this sooner, that's completely right. That's the appropriate response to this material. Because here's the truth. Almost none of us were taught the rules of money growing up. They don't teach the 5 laws of gold in school. No one sits a 16-year-old down and says, listen carefully, because what you're about to learn will determine your financial reality for the rest of your life. That conversation almost never happens. So if you're 30 or 40 or 50 and you feel like you're behind, please understand, you were playing without knowing the rules.
and you cannot be held accountable for the results of a game you didn't know you were playing. But here's what is true. Right now, in this moment, you know the rules. You've just spent 2 hours with them. You've heard them through Arkad's story, and Dabasir's story, and Sharru Nada's story. You felt them, not just understood them. You have something tonight that you didn't have when you pressed play. And the past doesn't determine the future. It informs it, certainly, but it does not determine it. Dabasir proved that in a desert. Nomasir proved that in a foreign city with nothing left but a clay tablet. Arkad proved that in a scribe's salary. What they all had, what made the difference in every single story, was not talent or timing or tremendous luck. It was the decision to begin, to start where they were with what they had, and apply the principles with consistency and patience. Begin where you are. Save the 10% even if it feels small. Make the debt list even if the number is scary. Seek the wise counsel even if it's uncomfortable to admit you need it. Work with full effort, even in the work that feels beneath you. These are not glamorous instructions. They are ancient ones. They worked in Babylon 4,000 years ago. They worked for the couple with Dabasir's clay tablets in the 1920s. They work today in whatever city you're in, whatever decade you're living in. The principles do not care what year it is. They do not care how much you earn or how much you owe or what mistakes you've made. They work for anyone who applies them, consistently, honestly, over time. You have a richest man in Babylon life available to you. Not a lottery winner's life, not an overnight success story. Something better. A life built stone by stone on principles that will not betray you. A life where the walls are strong before the siege comes. Where your gold is working while you sleep. Where your debts are paid and your name is good. George Clason wrote this book as a set of pamphlets that banks gave away to their customers 100 years ago. He wanted ordinary people, not just the wealthy, not just the privileged, to have access to the rules of the game. He wanted Bansir and Kobbi to find out what Arkad knew before it was too late. Consider this your pamphlet. That is The Richest Man in Babylon, George C. Clason's complete guide to the ancient and timeless rules of money. If this resonated with you, I strongly encourage you to read the original. It is a short book. You could read it in a single afternoon, and reading Clason's words directly in that beautiful, archaic style is an experience that a summary, however thorough, cannot fully replicate. There is something about Arkad speaking to you directly that this medium cannot capture. Find the book, read it slowly, let it settle. If you want to keep exploring these ideas, there are a few books that pair beautifully with this one. The Psychology of Money by Morgan Housel, which explores the emotional and behavioral dimensions of how we relate to money and why we so often undermine ourselves. Rich Dad, Poor Dad by Robert Kiyosaki, which tackles the asset-building side of wealth in the modern era. And I Will Teach You to Be Rich by Ramit Sethi, which provides the practical modern infrastructure, automated savings, investment accounts, credit, that gives these ancient principles their contemporary home. Links to all of those are in the description below. If this video helped you, if something clicked, if something shifted, if you felt a small but real movement in how you think about money, please hit the like button. It takes 2 seconds, and it helps other people find this content. And subscribe if you want to keep going with me on these deep dives into the books that actually matter. I'm genuinely grateful you spent this time here. Now, go do the work. Build the thing. Lay the stones. Until next time.